We live in a world dazzled by luxury, entranced by aesthetic perfection, and lured into submission by names stitched into fabric. Designer brands no longer merely clothe bodies. They shape identities, dictate values, and in some eerie cases, channel something darker. Beneath the glimmer of runways, glossy marketing campaigns, and whispered celebrity endorsements, there are brands that do more than sell style. They seduce the soul. This is not a mere conspiracy. It's a slow, systematic erosion of spiritual sensitivity. Most people consume fashion without questioning the origin of its symbols, the intentions behind its creation, or the messages stitched into its very fabric. But fashion has become a battlefield, not of taste, but of truth. Certain designer brands are not just peddling luxury. They're peddling spiritual distortion masked as innovation, ritualism hidden as rebellion, and chaos marketed as creativity. What if the allure of some luxury brands was never about craftsmanship, but about conjuration? What if some of these labels are not just labels, but sigils? What if their catwalks are sanctuaries for something ancient, something esoteric, something demonic? We are told to express ourselves through fashion. But who planted that expression in the first place? Was it just a marketing team, or was there an ideological architect behind the scenes? Someone who understood the spiritual realm far better than we do. Many of these brands are not shy about it. From naming their collections after rituals to incorporating occult symbols like pentagrams, serpents, and Egyptian deities into their designs. These are not random acts of creativity. This is deliberate programming. When a brand stages a fashion show inside a cathedral and dresses models as saints and demons, that's not rebellion. That's ritual theater. If you believe that the soul matters, then what you wear becomes more than fabric. It becomes a declaration of allegiance. Not every designer brand is guilty of this, but some are, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The most chilling part, these brands do not hide their affiliations anymore. They flaunt them, they parade them, and the world applauds. But make no mistake, just because something is popular doesn't mean it's pure. Today, I will speak of 6 designer brands tainted by the unmistakable fingerprints of witchcraft, ritualism, and spiritual rebellion. You might love them, you might even own them, but after today you will think twice, because while the world sells vanity as virtue, those with spiritual eyes see what's really being sold, and it's far more costly than any price tag. Let me take you beneath the surface, past the embroidery, beyond the runway, into the spirit behind the stitch. They dress the models in crimson veils and gold horns, parade them through candle, lit runways inside deconsecrated churches, all while the crowd claps and celebrities sip champagne. But ask yourself, who is being celebrated here? This isn't just fashion, it's pageantry for the profane. One brand staged their entire show around the theme of resurrection, complete with blood, red garments and models emerging from what looked like crypts. This isn't design, it's doctrine, ritual in silk, sermons sewn into seams. These aren't just aesthetics, these are incantations worn on skin. You might ask, what harm is there in wearing a piece of clothing if I don't subscribe to the belief behind it? But that question is rooted in the assumption that what we wear carries no power, and that's where the deception begins, because everything carries power, especially things designed with intention. When a brand aligns itself with darkness, mockery of the sacred, or rituals that trace their origins to ancient rebellion against the divine, what they produce is not spiritually neutral. It is saturated. It is symbolic, and it is strategic. The designs are not just inspired by the occult, they are often used to normalize it. The more the public sees these symbols, the more they accept them. The more they accept them, the less they question them. This is not art imitating life. This is art initiating society. Balenciaga's campaigns have crossed the line into deeply disturbing territory, openly involving symbols that have ties to child abuse cases and hidden meanings. Gucci's constant flirtation with religious inversion, turning crosses upside down, dressing models as high priests of chaos, is not edgy, it is indoctrination. Mason Margiela's theatrical fascination with disembodiment and identity erasure goes beyond mere avant-garde. It speaks to a spiritual reality where human identity is no longer sacred but disposable. These brands are not creating culture, they are rewriting it. But here is the truth: no spell, no symbol, no brand, no matter how prestigious, has more power than spiritual discernment. Once your eyes are open, you can never be fooled again. Once you learn the language of symbols, the whispers in fabric become deafening. And once you recognize the spirit behind the spectacle, you gain the power to choose, truly choose, what you allow into your life. We don't need to be angry, we don't need to boycott with rage, but we do need to walk in wisdom. Wisdom sees beneath the surface, wisdom sees through the veil, and wisdom always, always guards the soul. This isn't just about fashion, it's about influence, it's about identity, and ultimately it's about allegiance. Will you continue to wear garments sewn with rebellion, or will you choose to clothe yourself in truth? Because in a world where branding has become a form of spiritual branding, neutrality is no longer an option. Don't be impressed by luxury that's built on sacrilege. Don't be drawn to designs that demand your spirit in exchange for style. Fashion doesn't need to be demonic to be beautiful, and you don't need to wear a curse to feel valuable. What you wear should reflect what you serve. Choose wisely, absolutely. Here's a long-form expansion of key point 1. Balenciaga, without any headings, and written as part of a flowing, in-depth speech narrative that carries the same spiritual and moral tone established earlier, and reaches approximately 1,000 words. Balenciaga is no longer just a fashion house. It has become a warning sign, a signal flare in a dark cultural sky, drawing attention to just how far the industry has fallen from innocence. What was once known for redefining silhouettes and elevating modern luxury has turned into a canvas of chaos, a theatrical blend of perversion, desecration, and ritualistic symbolism. And if there is any designer brand in recent years that has openly walked into the shadows and called it art, it is Balenciaga. When the disturbing ad campaign surfaced, the world responded with shock, but only momentarily. There, in professionally lit photographs, were children holding teddy bears clad in bondage gear. Behind them, court documents referencing real cases of child exploitation law were subtly but intentionally placed. This was no accident. Nothing in high-budget fashion photography is accidental. Every detail is reviewed, approved, curated. These were not oversights. They were invitations to witness something dark under the guise of provocation. Some said it was just fashion. Others called it misguided artistic expression. But let's be honest. When children are placed in suggestive poses with objects tied directly to adult fetishes, that is not art. That is spiritual pollution. What made it worse was the eerie silence from many cultural elites who, at other times, would have raised their voices in protest. But here, in the glow of designer prestige, the outrage was curiously restrained. This reveals how deeply the industry protects its own, especially when the darkness being peddled is dressed in couture. But let's zoom out. Balenciaga didn't arrive at this point overnight. The brand has been flirting with sacrilege and subversion for years. Their shows have often featured models in distorted forms, faces covered, identities erased, postures bent unnaturally, almost grotesquely. Some were dressed in all black, wrapped from head to toe, resembling ritualistic figures rather than fashion icons. It was never about elegance. It was about dehumanization, reducing the individual into a shadow, a silhouette, an echo of their true identity. One of their most infamous runway sets looked like a post-apocalyptic wasteland. Mud, covered grounds, dim lighting, ambient soundscapes that made the experience feel less like a fashion event and more like an occult ceremony. The models trudged through the mud as if part of some symbolic burial procession, souls being swallowed by the earth, stripped of dignity, and the audience applauded. They called it genius, but when spiritual discernment enters the room, it sees not genius, but gestures. Ritualistic gestures. In ancient times, covering one's face during ceremonies was part of invoking spirits, erasing personal ego in favor of channeling higher or darker forces. When faces disappear and human form is corrupted, it's not fashion. It's spiritual narrative, and Balenciaga has been telling a story for some time, a story of rebellion, erasure, and perversion. One show featured a model carrying a fake baby corpse wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. Yes, this actually happened, and again the brand wrapped it in layers of avant-garde explanation, but this wasn't symbolic of birth or motherhood. It was death, it was mockery, it was spiritual desensitization paraded as innovation. Fashion is often about contrast, but Balenciaga doesn't use contrast to inspire thought. They use it to confuse, innocence wrapped in perversion, childhood juxtaposed with bondage, sacred themes distorted into absurdity. These are not the acts of a brand seeking to uplift human experience. They are acts that desensitize, erode, and profane. Look at the symbology repeatedly featured in their designs and photography. Ropes, masks, blindfolds, exposed bones, blackened eyes, and postures of submission. These are not fashion statements. They are visual incantations, archetypes pulled from ancient rituals of domination, bondage, and sacrifice. Let's not pretend this is all accidental. The creative directors behind these projects are well-read, well-informed, and deeply immersed in cultural semiotics. They know what they are doing. They understand that repetition of a symbol embeds it into the psyche. That which was once unthinkable becomes acceptable, then trendy, then celebrated. It's the slow march of moral inversion. And here's what's truly disturbing. Young people love it. They idolize it, not because they understand it, but because they've been taught that the more offensive, the more twisted, the more obscure the fashion, the more it must be meaningful, and that is the trap. It is a spiritual spell dressed up in aesthetic rebellion. Balenciaga profits from the collapse of innocence. They dress the end of childhood in high fashion. They package despair and call it luxury. They are no longer content with making garments. They are making gods. Small twisted idols that people wear on their bodies without even realizing what they are aligning with. The brand didn't just cross a line. It erased it. And when the backlash came, instead of remorse, we got silence, followed by deflection, and ultimately, rebranding. They offered apologies that felt like PR templates, not repentance. And in the months that followed, celebrities returned, influencers forgave, and the machine rolled on. Why? Because money is louder than morality in the fashion world. And darkness is a marketable aesthetic if you can make it look good. but it's not good, it's vile, and this is where we must draw our own lines, not because we are easily offended, but because we are spiritually awake, because we understand that what enters through the eyes does not just influence the mind, it touches the soul, and no price tag, no limited edition release, no influencer endorsement is worth letting that corruption in. Wearing Balenciaga is no longer just a fashion statement. It is a spiritual one. It is a declaration, even if unintentional, that style is worth more than sanctity, that we are willing to ignore the symbols if the fabric fits, that we value image over innocence, but the soul knows better, and when the soul sees bondage disguised as beauty, it recoils. When it sees mockery disguised as mastery, it weeps, and so we must choose, not with outrage but with clarity, not with fear but with faith. We choose not to participate, not because it's trendy to cancel, but because it's right to resist. There is a spirit behind every stitch, and Balenciaga, for all its high fashion acclaim, has woven into its garments a darkness that cannot be ignored. Once you see it, you are no longer just a consumer, you are a witness, and witnesses must speak. This isn't about being fashionable. It's about being free. Gucci is not just a fashion brand, it is a cultural force, a name that echoes through music, lyrics, red carpets, and fashion capitals. For many, owning something from Gucci symbolizes arrival, status, wealth, taste. But beneath its iconic double G logo and its extravagant marketing lies something far more dangerous than mere vanity. Gucci has taken it upon itself to normalize, commercialize, and even celebrate imagery and rituals that are steeped in spiritual rebellion. The brand has, time and time again, toyed with themes that once would have shocked society, now repackaged as avant-garde, progressive, or worse, enlightened. The problem isn't just their aesthetic, it's their ideology. Over the past decade, Gucci has made a dramatic shift. They didn't simply rebrand, they reimagined themselves as cultural alchemists, taking sacred and profane symbols, mixing them together, and marketing them as fashion, forward enlightenment. From staging fashion shows in darkened Roman cemeteries to releasing campaigns featuring models with third eyes, serpents, and halos twisted into horns, Gucci no longer hides its spiritual inspiration. It showcases it. One of their most controversial shows was staged inside the cloisters of an ancient necropolis in Italy, a literal city of the dead. The setting was not chosen for beauty, it was symbolic, a gateway between the living and the dead, and that symbolism was reinforced in the designs. Models paraded down the runway holding replicas of their own severed heads. Others carried baby dragons or walked in straitjackets. Some wore halos made of iron and spike, icons of religious suffering twisted into grotesque art. This wasn't a tribute to the sacred, it was a parody. When a fashion house takes imagery associated with divine reverence and warps it into symbols of mockery, it isn't just being provocative. It is participating in spiritual distortion, a counterfeit form of worship. Gucci has continually done this with crosses turned upside down, saints reimagined as chaotic figures, and biblical archetypes wrapped in layers of androgyny and animalistic traits. This is not fashion, it is a sermon of confusion, a sermon of inversion. This is important to understand. The spiritual world is full of symbols, and those symbols have power. They tell stories. They communicate allegiance. When you wear a symbol, you embody a message, even if you don't understand it consciously. Gucci has understood this principle and weaponized it. They turn occult signs, pagan emblems and Gnostic mysteries into wearable art, inviting people not just to admire them, but to wear them, to become living, breathing extensions of those narratives. The serpent, an ancient symbol of deception, enlightenment, and forbidden knowledge, is one of Gucci's most used emblems. It's on belts, scarves, bags, jewelry. To the untrained eye, it's just a design. But historically, the serpent has never been neutral. It represents the original rebellion, the rejection of divine order in exchange for hidden wisdom. And when a brand like Gucci saturates its collections with snakes slithering around sacred motifs, they are not being edgy, they are being intentional. Look closely and you'll find other troubling patterns. Repeated use of all-seeing eyes icons used in occult traditions to represent illumination from false light sources. Stars arranged in pentagrams, horned beings subtly painted onto fabric. There are even campaigns where models are dressed as ritual participants, standing in geometric shapes surrounded by candles, invoking the language of old-world magic masked as fashion editorial. This is not about aesthetics. It's about aligning the body with a system of thought. It's not about fabric. It's about frequency. The deeper you look, the more disturbing it becomes. One ad campaign featured a model in an ornate crystal covered headpiece standing in front of what appeared to be a giant horned figure in the shadows, a silent deity looming over her shoulder. In another, models sit around a ceremonial table in the forest, a scene eerily mimicking a dark communion, surrounded by taxidermy, bones, and objects of sacrifice. There are no accidents here. These are narratives being communicated, stories being told without words. Gucci also plays with gender and identity in spiritually significant ways. There's nothing wrong with diversity or self-expression, but when the deliberate erasure of masculine and feminine distinction is paired with ancient motifs of shape, shifting, and identity confusion, it stops being social commentary and becomes a spiritual agenda. Many of Gucci's models are presented as neither male nor female, but as divine others, gods and goddesses, merged with beasts, often shown levitating, glowing, or possessing unnatural features. They're not being shown as human. They're being shown as post-human, as transcendent, as something beyond morality. This illusion of transcendence is perhaps the most dangerous lie of all, that by rejecting tradition, rejecting holiness, and embracing chaos, you somehow become more free, more enlightened, more you. But the truth is that this isn't liberation, it's seduction. It is the same old lie repackaged in silk and sequins, the same lie that told humanity that knowledge is better than obedience, that being like gods is worth any price. And what is the price? You may think it's just a few $1,000s for a handbag, but spiritually the cost is much higher, because when you normalize symbols of rebellion and wrap them in desirability, you deaden your discernment. You lose sensitivity to what is sacred, and once that happens, darkness walks right in, not as a monster, but as a muse. The designers behind these decisions are not naive. They study mythology, theology, metaphysics. They know what they're pulling from. They are not simply choosing themes at random. They are opening windows. And when the culture applauds, when influencers smile for the camera wearing inverted crosses and ritual robes, they participate in a drama that is no longer just theatrical. It is spiritual. Many still ask, but if I don't believe in it, isn't it harmless? The answer is simple. Exposure leads to desensitization, and desensitization leads to alignment. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to affect you. Spiritual principles are the same. Wearing darkness, even in ignorance, does not make it light. Gucci is not just designing clothes. They are crafting ideology. They are draping deception in velvet and selling it to the masses. Their creativity is undeniable. Mason Margiela is not a brand that shouts in the conventional sense. It whispers, cloaked in mystery. It seduces through abstraction, hides behind ambiguity, and elevates disconnection to the level of sacred art. But what many mistake as avant-garde innovation is, in truth, a ritualized dismantling of the human form. And what appears as rebellion is often the celebration of spiritual dismemberment. Unlike other fashion houses that use overt symbols, pentagrams, horns, dragons, Margiela's darkness is minimalist, conceptual, psychological. It doesn't seek to scandalize, it seeks to disorient. It fractures identity and leaves behind only echoes. From its very inception, Mason Margiela was obsessed with anonymity. Faces were covered. Models walked with their features concealed under veils, masks, and sometimes even synthetic skin. Designers behind the house famously remained faceless for years, refusing interviews, avoiding the spotlight. The brand itself had no traditional logo, no flamboyant celebrity endorsements. Instead, it focused on removing the designer from the product, and by extension, the person from the body. This detachment is not humility, it is an artistic theology, a deliberate ritual of erasure. In spiritual terms, the face is identity, the face is soul. To remove the face is not just a visual gimmick, it is a symbolic act of dehumanization. In ancient rituals, covering the face marked a shift from the personal to the spiritual. It was how initiates were stripped of ego, how they were prepared for transformation, often through death, often through submission. In Mason Margiela, every faceless model becomes a walking archetype, no longer a person, but a vessel, and vessels can be filled with anything. The concept of the mask reoccurs constantly in their work. A mask is never neutral. It either conceals truth or projects something artificial in its place, and Margiela uses masks not to protect, but to provoke. The result is an army of ghostly mannequins, each one carrying the scent of lost humanity. Eyes are removed, mouths are sealed, emotion is forbidden, the body is stylized, dissected, and finally depersonalized, and fashion critics applaud this as revolutionary. But revolution against what? Against the divine imprint of identity, against the image of man as sacred, seen, and fully known. Margiela also pioneered the technique of deconstruction. This is where garments are intentionally left unfinished, insides turned out, seams exposed, padding and structure visible. This visual technique is brilliant, but it's more than aesthetic. It communicates a spiritual philosophy. Nothing is whole, everything is broken. The hidden must be exposed. The private must be public. There is no mystery, only dissection. This echoes ancient Gnostic heresies. The belief that materiality is a prison, the body a falsehood, and freedom is found through tearing apart what is seen to reach what is hidden. Margiela clothes often look like post-mortem examinations of the human frame. Dresses hang like skins, jackets are flayed open, everything speaks of aftermath. It is fashion that has passed through fire and come out charred, cold, and clinical. And yet there is reverence around it. Fashion journalists bow to it, art curators praise it, students study it like scripture, because what Margiela offers is not just garments. It offers nihilism packaged as insight. It teaches the soul to let go of the desire to be known, to be personal, to be anchored. It teaches that anonymity is liberation, that identity is optional, and that expression should be muted unless filtered through conceptual layers. But here's the hidden cost. This isn't just about rejecting consumer culture or rebelling against mainstream aesthetics. This is about spiritual self-erasure, the disappearance of the individual, the reduction of personhood to silhouette and stitch. The absence of logos and labels doesn't make Margiela pure, it makes it a cult of absence. And in the void, something else always moves in. One of the most unnerving presentations from the house featured models walking slowly through stark, clinical spaces, their bodies wrapped in sterile mummy like gauze. They looked less like people and more like remnants. Echoes of flesh. The audience sat in reverent silence, as if observing an unspoken funeral. There was no celebration of life, only abstraction. The spirit had been removed from the body, and all that was left was form. Mason Margiela's obsession with the uncanny, the not quite human, blurs the boundary between person and object. Several collections featured mannequin, like prosthetics, foam armor, glass panels. Models became moving installations, not beings. This speaks to a deeper cultural longing to transcend the limitations of flesh by sacrificing the very thing that makes us human, our spiritual core. Margiela does not shout its allegiance to occult forces. It whispers through absence. It seduces through detachment. And that is why it's so dangerous. There are no horns, no inverted crosses, no dramatic rituals. Just silence, sterility, and the slow unraveling of personhood. And for some, this makes it even more seductive, because it feels intellectual, refined, untouchable. But spiritual discernment doesn't look for theatrics. It looks for patterns. And in the slow, calculated removal of identity, the covering of faces, the celebration of erasure, and the dissection of form, there is a pattern of surrender not to God, but to void, a pattern of spiritual anorexia, where the soul is starved under the guise of sophistication. And the irony is, this anti-fashion has become fashion's new religion. It has disciples, initiates, language, rituals. It trains the eye to see ugliness as revelation, emptiness as enlightenment, and distortion as honesty. But what it never shows you is what lies beneath the mask, because often there is nothing there. You wear a Margiela coat not to reveal yourself, but to disappear, and disappearance is not freedom. Disappearance is surrender. In a time where young people are searching for identity more desperately than ever, fashion brands like this do not guide. They ghost. They do not offer mirrors. They offer smoke. And so we must ask again, what are we wearing? Who are we becoming? And who are we allowing to shape us? Mason Margiela's greatest danger is not its style, but its silence. Its rejection of identity is not passive. It is spiritual. And when you wear what erases you, you are no longer the owner of your image. You become the canvas for someone else's ritual. And in a world where fashion is increasingly ritualized, this is not a choice we can make blindly. Because when a brand removes your face, it doesn't just cover your skin, it begins to bury your soul.